Hey everybody, and welcome back to our sneak peek into Battle for Baldur's Gate, the Commander set that's releasing on June 10th. Once again, all of your LGSs will be running a pre-release event on the June 3rd weekend, so that'll be our first chance of seeing the set in person. But let's go ahead and talk about some more of the cards that we have in this set. But first, caffeine. Let's go. Alright, so first we're going to start with the white cards as always. We have Contraband Livestock. This is a 2-mana instance. Exile target creature and then you roll d20. So the effects that we have, on a 1-9, the controller creates a 4/4 green ox creature token. On a 10-19, its controller creates a 2/2 green boar creature token. Or on a nat 20, the controller gets a 0/1 white goat creature token. So for 2 mana, you're for sure exiling a creature. What you're replacing it with is either a 4/4, a 2/2, or a 0/1. I think even if you're exiling something and creating a 4/4 for 2 mana, that can still be good if you're exiling something that is maybe not more powerful than a 4/4, but something that has a worse effect than a 4/4. I mean, you're just giving them a 4/4 green vanilla creature, so even on a nat 1, you could be doing enough to where this 2-mana spell can be worth it. I think a 10-19, creating a 2/2 green boar, I think that's almost always going to be okay. And then on a nat 20, a 0/1 white goat, that's even better. So I definitely think this card is good. At uncommon, this should be widely played, I think. Next we have Githurai Monk, which is a 5-mana 3/2 Gith Monk. It has flash, it has flying, and then its psychic defense ability is whenever it enters the battlefield, tap all creatures that you don't control. That can combo really well if it wasn't so expensive. I think it's meant to be played at flash speed though, so you can do it when someone enters combat, tap everything they have, and then it goes back to you. So in a commander format, it's not as strong a card because you're definitely going to want to wait for the last moment to play this. But since you're tapping all creatures that you don't control, you do it when one of your opponents enters combat, you at least stop one of the opponents from attacking you. But then the next opponent, if they have another turn after that, one of your other opponents gets to untap all their stuff anyways. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be attacked before your next turn. It just sort of stops one of your opponents, maybe the strongest one, whichever one you think is more likely to attack you. So I'm not really sure exactly how to evaluate that card. It having flash is the only thing that makes it useful. 5-mana 3/2 flying isn't worth it. So flash and the ability to tap all your opponent's creatures, I guess, is good. But it's still, it's a pricey thing. You're leaving 5 mana open on your turn, so. Next we have Hammers of Mordin, which is a 3-mana 3/3 Dwarf Cleric with Myriad. So whenever this attacks, for each opponent, you tap up to 1 target creature that player controls, which is really good, especially because, again, with Myriad, when you're attacking every other opponent, for each other opponent, you're creating a token of this card, and this token is attacking that person. So again, if you have 3 opponents and you're attacking opponent number 1, you'll create 2 more tokens, each one attacking a different opponent. And also, when they attack, you get to tap up to 1 target creature that player controls, which is good. So, I definitely think this card is really good. For 3-mana 3/3, and with the ability combo that it has, I think that's really strong. Next, we have Rescuer Chwinga, a 2-mana 2/2 Elemental Spirit with Flash, and it has natural shelter, so whenever this enters the battlefield, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. So probably want to do this when your opponent's attacking you and you declare a blocker and your blocker is about to die. Before the damage step, you flash this in and return that blocker back to your hand. So the block still happens, and before damage step, you were able to save your creature. So I think that's probably the intent here. But it can also work as a slow way of returning something to your hand that has a good enter the battlefield effect. So there's a couple different interactions you can do with it. I think the intention here was to protect one of your blockers. So not a bad card. For 2 mana, you're still getting a 2/2, and it does this cool effect, so I think it's probably fine. And then finally, we have the Tobaccy Toucaneers, because toucans, I guess. It's a 5-mana 3/2 Cat Ranger. It has flying, and it has Myriad. For 5 mana, it's not all that great. I think it's cool to have cat people riding toucans, but I think that aside from the flavor of the card, I think the card itself is pretty bad. I think 5-mana 3/2 Flying Myriad isn't worth it. It definitely is meant to combo with some of your other commanders, I think, though, that are running in the set that do things when you attack opponents. That does it for all our white cards. That moves us to blue, and we start off strong with our Ancient Silver Dragon. This is an 8 mana Elder Dragon. It's an 8/8 with flying, and when this deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20 and you draw cards equal to that result. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Wow. So you just need to deal combat damage one time, and then forever, even when this creature dies, no longer do you have a maximum hand size. It doesn't matter if this is on the board. The way it's worded is you simply don't have a maximum hand size for the rest of the game, and that's just because you dealt combat damage to a player. So it may be slow to get this creature to attack something, and for 8 mana that may be pricey for a dragon, but I definitely think it's worth it. I think this is a card that you run in even non-dragon decks, being able to draw cards equal to a d20 result and no longer have a maximum hand size simply by dealing combat damage, and this thing has flying, so it's less likely to be blocked. There's just a lot of reasons why this is a good card, so I think this is one of those cards you just run in a lot of different decks. Next we have Kendra Discovery, a 5 mana enchantment that whenever it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and whenever a creature you control the chosen type enters the battlefield or it attacks, you get to draw a card. That's really good, especially in token decks, because each time a creature attacks, it'll activate. It's not whenever one or more creatures that you control of the chosen type attack. It's whenever a creature you control the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, you draw a card. So in a token deck, this would be really good. Maybe you choose humans, or maybe you choose soldiers, and so every time you generate tokens, or maybe you choose spirits, every time you choose that particular tribal, then every token that's generated, well, that enters the battlefield, therefore triggering the card draw. So for 5 mana, you're probably drawing a lot of cards if this enchantment isn't dealt with before it gets back to your turn. So I definitely see this card being a really worthwhile card to run. Next we have Modify Memory, a 5 mana sorcery. Exchange control of 2 target creatures controlled by different players, and if you control neither of the creatures, you get to draw 3 cards. So 5 mana, swap 2 creatures on the board, and so long as you weren't part of that swap, you get to draw 3. I think it's pretty good, especially if it's a commander that you're swapping. Odds are, if you're swapping 2 of your opponent's commanders, and you're giving opponent number 1, opponent number 2's commander, and you're giving opponent number 2, opponent number 1's commander, odds are, whereas these commanders are good cards, there's no synergy that each one of the opponents have for the other opponent's commander. So you should be shutting down your opponent's decks by doing this. You still have the board threat to deal with, but by exchanging control of the commanders, what's really good about that is you shut down 2 opponents' decks with 1 spell, you get to draw 3 cards and maintain card advantage, and there's nothing that someone can do to stop swapping control of commanders. You don't get to choose for your commander to go to command zone because you lose control of it. It has to leave the battlefield. So because it doesn't leave the battlefield, the opponents can do nothing to protect their commanders, and until they can find a way, and with this being a sorcery, it makes it even more dangerous, because there's not an enchantment for them to target. They either counter this spell, and of course if you're swapping 2 of your opponent's cards, at least there's a likelihood that that will happen, since 2 opponents are now going to try to stop the spell instead of just 1. You're not targeting 1 person here. So if neither of those 2 have a response though, then there's nothing they can do to stop the swap. They can't get their commanders back, and there's nothing on the board for them to target except for killing their own commander. And then odds are, opponent number 2 is not going to try to kill the commander they stole from opponent number 1, because they do like the fact that you shut down opponent number 1. So they're not necessarily going to help each other unless they politic. So if they don't politic, they're not going to help each other, and so each one of them are on their own trying to figure out how to kill their commander sitting on a different part of the board. So this is a great way to throw in some chaos into the game, and maybe to even incentivize another way of playing commander, which is something that people will try to warm into, which is to politic. Next we have the Oceanis Dragon, a 6 mana, 3/5 dragon. It has flying, and whenever this enters the battlefield, you tap target creature and opponent's controls, and then you goad it. Okay, yeah, for 6 mana it's about right for a dragon, but you're getting a 3/5 with flying, and I'm not sure that the tap and goading is really worthwhile. So I'm not sure this is a good card. I can understand why this is a common. So I think that this is one of the weaker dragons that we've seen so far, unfortunately, unless I'm missing something here. So for 3 mana, this is a good card, but it's 6. Okay. And that's everything for the blue. So next we move on to the black cards. We start with Ambition's Cost, a 4 mana sorcery that allows you to draw 3 cards and you lose 3 life. That's good. That's a good spell. I think I may have talked about that last time. Drawing cards is really good for black, so I think I recall talking a little bit about that. We've seen a lot more draw spells for blue, and of course blue's always been strong in card draw, but having another option for card draw for the black is good, and losing life may not be ideal, but typically if you're splashing in black into your deck, there are ways to maximize your value from losing life, instead of like what white would do, which is maximizing their gain of life. Then we have the Asterians Thirst, a 4-mana instant that exiles a creature and you put X +1/+1 counters on a commander creature that you control, X being the power of that creature that was exiled. That's not bad. I mean, 4-mana exiling something is really expensive, even at instant speed. Oftentimes, you're not going to see black leaving open mana to play something really all that good besides a removal spell. To leave 4 mana open, or to have to leave 4 mana open, is a pretty big cost to pay. You're losing your turn, odds are, because you want to play this at instant speed. You want to maximize that value. So you're missing out on your turn to leave mana open, to give your opponents time to play a bigger threat. And then once you've decided for sure that you know what threat to target, on the final opponent's end step, before it gets to your turn, you cast this at instant speed, you exile something, and you get to buff up your commander. I'm not saying that's a bad turn, I'm just saying that if you're leaving that mana open, it just leaves a lot of you doing nothing and hoping that your opponents have more, like there's only one real big threat you need to deal with here, because exiling one creature is a pricey thing for 4 mana. And I think we're used to seeing removals at 4 mana that exile things, so like Feed the Serpent is 4 mana, requiring 2 black devotion, this one only requiring 1 black devotion. So definitely, there are some pros to this card, it's just still you're leaving 4 mana open, and there are oftentimes better ways to deal with threats than that. For black especially, we're used to 5 mana board clears, and here we are looking at a 4 mana targeted exile. So next we have Blood Money for 7 mana. It is a mythic rare sorcery. Destroy all creatures, and for each non-token creature destroyed this way, you create a tapped treasure token. So for 3 more mana than the Asterians Thirst we just looked at, you can destroy everything and create a bunch of treasure. So, I mean, that just seems like a better way to go. I get that sorcery speed, but honestly, Asterians Thirst, it being an instant speed isn't much value since you're doing it for 4 mana. Instants are better at 3 mana or less, so anytime you pay more than that for an instant, oftentimes you've wasted your turn to do nothing just to play the spell. So Blood Money, I think, is a much better way to go. I get it, Destroy doesn't get around a lot of things, but I think that in this case, this is a good enough card that this is what you'd want to run. Alright, then we have Cast Down. For 2 mana, it's an instant, destroy target non-legendary creature. Yep, good card. It's removal for 2 mana, 1 less than what we're used to, and the restriction being that it has to be non-legendary. That's fair. I'm used to 3 mana target non-black, so it's good that this can target a multicolored deck without the threat of being ineffective. Then we have Cloud Kill, a 6 mana sorcery. All creatures get -X until their turn. X being the greatest mana value of a commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. So this is really good because you don't even risk your own commander. So long as your commander is sitting in the command zone, so long as it has, let's see, you're paying 6 mana, so I guess ideally you want it to be at least -4/-4. So as long as you have a 4 mana commander, then, and you don't have to, I believe that the backgrounds count as a commander. So even if your background is the expensive spell that you're running, it counts as a commander since this doesn't say commander creature that you own. So you could pay 6 mana, and whichever one of your 2 commanders is the highest cost, this gives -X to everything. It gets around indestructible, it gets around a lot of things. So this just kills them, and I think that's really good. And you can protect your commander by keeping it in the command zone while you play the spell. So I think this is another good spell, and a great board clear. Alright, next we have Eldritch Pact. This is a 7 mana sorcery. Target player draws X cards and loses X life, X being the number of cards in their graveyard. So this is really good for a few different things. For 7 mana, I think you're looking to draw, I think 5 cards, I think is what you're looking for. Anything above that is good. So I think you're looking for a 7 mana, draw 5 at least. So you want to have 5 cards in your graveyard, lose 5 life. I think that's fair. Alternatively, you could be playing a mill deck where you've milled out one of your opponents a lot, and you can cause them to draw however many cards are in their graveyard, which means if half their library is in their graveyard, they draw the rest of their deck, so they lose the game anyways on their next turn. Or, since you're playing a 40 life format here, you could do it where maybe they're down to like 20 life, and even if they have 30 cards left in their library and only 70 cards are milled, they still lose the game because they lose the life that's in their graveyard. So this can kill one of your opponents pretty easily if you're playing with mill, Or, if you're not, it can draw you enough cards to be worth it, so long as you have 5 cards in your graveyard, and by the time you're playing a 7-mana spell, odds are, you've got 5 cards in your graveyard at this point. Next, we have Ghost Lantern, a 1-mana equipment. So, it can go on an adventure at instant speed. For 2 mana, you can bind a spirit first, which returns target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And then, the equipment itself is a 1-mana equip. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. So the equipment's not all that good. I'm glad that it's a cheap 1 mana to get out, 1 mana to equip, but a counter, I guess it is a +1/+1 counter, which is nice. It does stick around for a while, but I'm looking for a little bit more for my equipments typically. But the adventure is pretty good. 2 mana, return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. That's good. It's about what we'd expect. Being able to do it at instant speed is also really nice, so you can play it on one of your opponent's end steps. Maybe after maybe you were planning on saving mana to return a creature that's already in your graveyard to your hand, but you can also wait until all your opponents took a turn. Maybe they eliminated one of your bigger threats, and now your target changes. So on your final opponent's end step, you pay the 2 mana to play the Ghost Lantern at its instant speed, and then you decide, okay, well, I need to return one of the cards that were just removed instead of the card I was hoping to get. Either way, though, this is a good card. Next, we have the Intellect Devourer. For 4 mana, this is a 2/4 horror. It has Devourer Intellect. Whenever this enters the battlefield, each opponent exiles a card from their hand until this leaves the battlefield. And then it also has Body Thief. You may play lands and cast spells from among the cards that were exiled with this card. And if you cast a spell this way, you can spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. For 4 mana, I think that's enough. That's a lot of stuff that it's doing. Probably enough to make it worth something. It being a horror means it doesn't fit in with a lot of different tribals. It's very specific. But I still think that this card can end up being a good enough card to run in certain decks. Alright, next we have a 3 mana Sigil of Merkel, an enchantment. It is at the beginning of combat on your turn, mill a card. When you do, if there are 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and it gains Death Touch until the end of the turn. That's not bad. It's a good card, especially in black where milling is a thing. I think that for 3 mana, it doesn't have an immediate effect unless you're playing it later in the game, but it's still a good card. I can see this being used. Alright, that does it for our black cards. Next, we start with our red. We start with Ganassi Enforcers, a 2 mana 1/3 elemental shaman with Myriad. For 2 mana, creatures you control that are named Ganassi Enforcers get +1 power until the end of the turn. So it's a 2 mana creature, and of course it has Myriad, so when it attacks, for each opponent you create another copy of Ganassi Enforcers tapped and attacking each of your other opponents. Then you would activate the 2 mana as many times as you can, buff all of them up at the same time, making them a bigger threat. Problem is that they don't get trampled, they don't get lifelink, they don't have flying, so they're pretty easy to block. So, whereas I like the ability, I like the idea behind it, I think it's too easy to deal with, so I don't think that's that great of a card. It is a common after all. I just feel like that there are probably other ways that they could have gone about this card, and maybe they were trying not to make it too powerful for 2 mana, but I think the way they made it currently makes it to where it's just too weak. Next we have the Null Warband, which is a 6 mana 5/5 Null. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each opponent who is dealt damage this turn. It has Menace and it has Myriad. So this is a really good card, even for just 5 mana. So if you can discount it by just 1, that's fine. For 5 mana, you get a 5/5 with Menace, which is already good, but also the Myriad ability, which again is crazy because this thing, once it taps and attacks one of your opponents, it creates a copy again for each other opponent you have, and each of these copies are attacking each opponent you have. With Menace, makes them a lot harder to block, so it more guarantees that they're going to be taking 5 damage, which may not seem like a lot, but it is 1/8 of their health, so they take this damage 8 times, they lose the game, so it does end up being a threat eventually. Alright, next we have Storm King's Thunder. This is a 3 red X generic mythic rare instant, which is when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, you copy the spell X times, and you may choose new targets for the copies. Wow, this is pretty good. It's just really hard to figure out how you would combo that out, especially with 3 requirement for red and then X. So even if you only cast 4 mana, and then say it's turn 7, 4 mana for Storm King's Thunder, 3 mana for your other spell, I guess, maybe 8, then you're able to copy that spell 1 more time. Oftentimes copying it just once is still enough. So I think this spell ends up being good. It's just hard to tell for sure. But I think it's good, especially with roll D20 effects. It just gives you an opportunity to roll that die another time, which, you know, I want to do. And then finally for red, we have the Young Red Dragon, a 4 mana, 3/2 dragon that's flying and it cannot block. It can go on an adventure and bathe in gold for 2 mana at instant speed where it creates a treasure token. Nothing crazy going on here with this dragon. I think it's probably okay, but 4 mana is kind of pricey for what it's doing, and 2 mana create a treasure is not worth it. So I think it's probably too slow. Alright, and then we start with our green cards. We start with the Lurking Green Dragon, a 4 mana 4/4 dragon. It is flying. It cannot attack unless the defending player controls a creature that has flying. Okay, I mean 4 mana 4/4 flying is okay, but then it has a restriction where it can't attack unless the defending player controls the flying. It doesn't have the Myriad or Menace or anything like that. If it had Menace, I think that'd be hilarious because you have to attack somebody who is flying, sure, but odds are they still can't block anyways. But the way that they printed it as is, it's a 4 mana 4/4 flying, no vigilance, no haste, nothing like that. So, I mean, it's not 6 mana. I guess they gave you a 2 mana discount, and that's why it has a restriction. But 4 mana 4/4 is already meh. It has flying, which makes it a little bit over the edge, but I think this is meant to combo with other dragon synergy to make this really good. Okay, next we have Skullwinder, a 3 mana 1/3 snake. It has Death Touch, and whenever this enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, choose an opponent, and then that player returns a card from their graveyard to their hand. This is a cool way to politic too. You can make a deal with somebody when you play a card like this, and I think that's really good. So for the politicking, a 3 mana 1/3 Death Touch and politic is good. I think otherwise the card's not so good, so unless you want to run this in a deck where politicking is something you're okay with doing. And finally for green, we've split the spoils for 3 mana. It is a sorcery that allows you to exile up to 5 target permanent cards from your graveyard and separate them into 2 piles. An opponent chooses one of the piles, and that pile goes in your hand, and the other just goes back to the graveyard. The piles can, of course, be empty. We've seen cards like this before with Sphinxes and such. So what will happen is if they can choose one empty pile and create one pile that is full of all the cards you exiled, but that's fine. You get to be the one who chooses what pile goes where. Oh no, you're the one separating them. Oh, fair enough. So you can choose an empty pile, and then all the other cards go into the graveyard. I'm used to usually what will happen is your opponent creates the pile, and then you get to choose the pile. In this case, you're the one creating the piles. One of your opponents will be choosing a pile. So what's good about that is at least you can make sure one good card goes in each pile, just to hedge your bets. Or once again, you could theoretically, this could be another politicking situation where you don't put anything too powerful into the good pile, but you can put a pile that's good enough. Maybe it runs an answer to a problem that one of your other opponents are having that you're not having to deal with. And the deal could be, look, if you let me get one of my really good cards that are in this pile, you choose this pile, I'll also be getting an answer to your problem. I'll make sure I solve the problem you're having to deal with that isn't a problem for me. And then you also allow me to get this one other good card that I'm excited about getting. So as long as it's not a big enough threat to that opponent might be incentivized to help you, and it could also bring them back into the game. So it's very D&D-esque in that way. Alright, and that does it for all of our green cards. Next we move to multicolored. We have Myrim, Sentinel Worm. This is a 6 mana, 3 generic, 1 green, 1 blue, 1 red, a 6/6 legendary dragon spirit. It has flying and it has ward 2. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except that's not legendary if that dragon is legendary. Yeah, this is a really good card, and even though it's expensive, I definitely think this is a commander-worthy card. It's legendary, so it counts. It has 3 different colors in its casting cost, so you can run a tricolor deck here. And so I think this makes the dragons a lot stronger too, because it runs green and it runs blue, which are ones that this set's trying to incentivize you to run. But it also runs red, which means you have access to a lot of other cool dragons from other sets that would fit really well into a deck like this. So I think this deck makes dragons pretty powerful. I know you already have the Dragon, but this is a more accessible card, especially to players like myself who haven't been around long enough to have the Dragon. I haven't gotten heavily into Magic until somewhat recently. So a card like this ends up being more accessible to newer players while still being a strong enough commander that I think it could compete against some pretty strong decks. Alright, and that's all of our colorless cards. Next we move on to our artifacts. We start with Blade of Cells, a 2 mana equipment. Equipped creature has Myriad and it equips for 4 mana. So is Myriad worth 4 mana? Probably on a dragon it would be. On anything else, Probably not. Remember, your dragons do something really cool, especially some of the ones that, when it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20, do this cool thing. So I definitely could see this card being good in a dragon deck. Attach it to that ancient silver dragon or the ancient copper dragon. And the copper dragon, when it deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20, and you create that many treasure tokens. Well, if it has myriad, then it's hitting potentially 3 opponents. So you're rolling 3 d20s, add those results up together, create that many treasure tokens, or you put on ancient silver dragon, you're potentially hitting 3 different opponents with that, because it has flying, it's really hard to block, and it's an 8/8. So odds are you're dealing 8 damage to an opponent with ancient silver dragon, rolling 3 d20s, adding the results of those together, and then you get to draw that many cards and no longer have a maximum hand size for the rest of the game. You could also potentially run this with that one person who lets you roll a d20 again. Anytime you would roll a d20, roll another d20, take the higher result, essentially giving you advantage on your rolls, just like you would get in D&D. So that's really fun too, because that means each time one of your dragons hits your opponent, maybe you also get to go ahead and roll the d20 at advantage each time you're rolling it. So you're taking the high result for each roll you're doing, then you're adding up those high rolls together, and you're drawing that many cards. So there's some crazy stuff I feel like you could do with this one. And whereas Myriad is a newer keyword, I think that maybe Myriad's an ability you want to see on equipments. Maybe it's a new keyword that you'd want to have, because I can definitely see this doing some crazy stuff. There are also other creatures that I can think of that in older sets, Master of Cruelties, where if it deals combat damage to a player, you just bring their life total down to 1. Imagine equipping this to that creature. It has Myriad, so it's attacking all of your opponents. So it's not unblockable, but should you be in a situation where it even hits one of your opponents, you get them down to 1, you may not have removed them from the game, but you have effectively removed them from the game at that point. They must play on the defensive just to stay alive. Alright, next we have the Fraying Line. For 4 mana as an artifact, when this enters the battlefield, put a rope counter on target creature that you control, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may pay 2 mana, and if they do that, they put a rope counter on a creature that they control. Otherwise, you exile this, and each creature that does not have a rope counter on it is exiled. Yep, and then you just remove the rope counters that are on the creatures that had them. So the Fraying Line is just a matter of, like, if everybody on their upkeep pays 2 mana, hopefully has a creature to put a rope counter on, the first time that an opponent runs out of creatures to put rope counters on, or decides not to pay 2 mana to get a rope counter, means that at that point, every creature that didn't get a rope counter is being exiled. So this is a really cool board wipe, because exile gets around a lot of crazy stuff, and a 4 mana artifact, this makes everybody play almost like a mini game within Magic at that point. So this could be a very fun card to run, and it being an artifact means it can be run in any deck. Next we have Mighty Servant of Luco, I guess. It's a 3 mana 6/6 vehicle. It has trample, and for ward, the opponent targeting it must discard a card. Whenever this becomes crewed for the first time each turn, if it was crewed by exactly 2 creatures, it gains, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw 2 cards until the end of the turn. It does have a crew 4 requirement, so as long as you're crewing it with 2 different creatures, they can be power 2 each, and then it's pretty effective. But you have the option of crewing it with 2 creatures even if you exceed that crew number. You just can't go under the crew number. So if you crew with 2 different things and then this deals combat damage to a player, it does have trample, so that does increase its likelihood of dealing combat damage. So a 6/6, high enough power, trample, combos well. If somebody tries to target it with spell or ability, they have to discard a card because that's its ward ability. So I can definitely see this doing some pretty cool stuff. Still though, maybe too slow. Maybe you run it in a token deck though. I mean, I definitely think this is a good card. I just think it is a little bit more strict in terms of the requirement it has as to what kind of deck it can run in, which is odd for an artifact, but I can see this running well in certain types of decks. Next we have Mind Stone, a 2 mana artifact. Sorry, this is just a reprint of a card. I don't know why I'm talking about like it's a new card, but still, the new art for Mind Stone looks pretty cool. Cool enough that I thought it was a cooler card than just Mind Stone, but okay, cool. You're gonna have a chance of getting Mind Stone because not enough people have it yet, I guess. And looking over all the other cards, it looks like that's all the cards that we have to go over for today. So if there's a card that you're really excited about, a card that you want to maybe put your input on, you think it's better than I think it is, worse than I think it is, or you are just as excited about a card as I am, or you're just as underwhelmed by a card that I am, feel free to talk about that down below in the comments. I look forward to seeing them either way. Until next time, later gamers.